Okay. Well, I was haven't had a chance really to talk to Sergeant Cintron this morning, but it looks like we drew the dreaded right before lunch slot. Everybody is getting hungry and ready to go. When I walked out of the door, thank you, Dr. Finn, for the invite to speak today. I do feel kind of bad, even though I have a PhD. I don't know that I can pronounce 90% of the words that all of you have mentioned already this morning. When I walked out the door this morning, my wife said, make sure that you tell your story, because your story matters. And although I don't have the studies and I don't have the research that you will all have with you, this is kind of an interesting picture that's going on across our schools. My first experience, well, I actually had 3 experiences with marijuana when I was in high school. Just so you know, none of them involved me actually consuming marijuana. But I knew a student, I had a good friend whose parents were way ahead of their time, were involved in the grow industry in one of their closets. I had another friend who, he would appear every year in August or September when school would start, and by October or November, he was expelled from school. And then he'd come back the next year, and he'd start the school year again, and he'd gradually start to disappear from classes, and then he'd be gone, and then he'd show back up. And then the last experience I had was March of my senior year, where a random locker search turned up a dime bag of marijuana in a cigarette pack that was in my locker. I'm grateful that my friend took full responsibility for it. I'm sad that he was expelled from school in his senior year with only 3 months left. And I am still sad today that he's involved in that world and has still never graduated from high school. So that's kind of where I come from. But today I thought I'd talk a little bit about marijuana revenues, and I'll have to apologize. Our CFO could not be here from District 11 today. So he gave me his 2 slides on the marijuana revenues. So if you, after I finish, if I have any questions about that, I will direct you to him, because I'm sure that I'll probably not get this as accurate as it really needs to be. I'll tell you a little bit about data and how data works in the state of Colorado and kind of some things we're seeing in schools. Of course, largely anecdotal and just some raw numbers, and then where we're headed, where we're going from here. So this summer I was on a trip. I took my wife. It was 15-year anniversary, actually 16 years. We went down to, by the way, I'm a former social studies teacher, so I like to tell stories. So just be prepared for that. So we went down to Antigua to do a little scuba diving, and we did a little tour of the island. And when we went around the island, for those of you who are into classic rock music like I am, Antigua is the second home for Eric Clapton. He has a treatment facility there. In fact, when you tour the island, you'll actually see the treatment facility from the water. And we were talking with 2 couples that we met, because this is a couples-only resort. We wanted to make sure we were away from our daughter for a little bit. They started talking to us, and we said, oh, look, here it is. And you can see Clapton's house, and we're talking. And they said, oh, you're from Colorado. You must have some of the best treatment facilities in the world. And I said, well, I don't work in that industry. I actually work in education. And he goes, oh, you have even better schools in Colorado because of marijuana. So the next 30 minutes proceeded to be a conversation about where you can buy it, where you can't buy it, and how it's affected our schools. In our district, it's safe to say that whatever revenue people believe they were going to help us out with when they voted for this isn't going to funnel our way. Okay? And I'm sure there's probably people in the audience who know more about the taxation system and all this in terms of property than I ever could know. But largely what has happened is the funding stream has been tied to new capital construction, which of course if you're in Colorado Springs School District 11, all you got to do is take a look around. We've been closing properties for one, and the other issue is that we just don't really have much space left. I mean, where would we build a new school? I mean, you know, we had to actually take buildings and condense them into one, which I'll get to in a moment. It's all tied in, of course, to the sales tax for the medical side of it, and of course the state excise tax that was added on. There is no money for operating funds. We could really use some operating revenue, but it's not tied to that. So a good friend of mine who I've known for many, many years, voted and was really excited to see it, and he believed, honestly, that it would impact schools and have this dramatic effect on schools, and now, of course, he's backpedaled on that a little bit. One of the things that I have to have kind of a quick cautionary, I have to kind of give you some limitations for my numbers that I'm about to show you, is that these really are numbers of students who are in trouble for student disciplinary issues. Dr. Finn introduced me. I have 29,000 students in District 11. I deal with about 400 students a year, petitioning them for truancy issues. And then I'll probably deal with another 400 students because of disciplinary issues. So I'm only looking specifically and working directly with about 800 students in the district, but I look at and work with over 60 schools and programs who report their behavior and kind of trends that they're seeing, and that's what you'll see here. As you know, in education, we don't really have a lot of really good experimental studies. I have yet to find a superintendent who will allow me to have a control group and a treatment group for anything, really, but this one, of course, is really, really tough. So we're always reacting to numbers, and that's the problem. Is we're watching it and seeing where we were last year, how does it compare to this year, what percentage of behavior it is. So it's not anywhere near as in depth as we've been getting to. Colorado is interesting in the fact that this is the first, actually last school year, 15-16 school year, was the first year that they asked us to report out marijuana as a separate event. Prior to that, all drugs were just kind of grouped together into one. And although they require us and mandate us to report out on certain numbers of events that occur, we do not use the same student information systems. And of course, the accuracy can always be suspect. It can always be difficult to say which school districts are being accurate, which school districts are being transparent, and where do they code some of these behaviors. In our district, we're looking at probably over 50 different behavior codes when we go in to enter student behavior in there. So that's a key to remember as I kind of go through this and show you. Another one of the issues that we have is that we're kind of operating inside some competing systems, and I think this is very important to understand how we're trying to react to this. This is new for a lot of our administrators. School district administrators go in to work with teachers and to work with kids. It's very, very difficult when you're saying you have to deal with student discipline issues, and if student discipline issues start to go on the rise, that's less time working with kids and less time working with teachers. And it's very, very hard on our staff, and I think Sergeant Cintron will share that with you as well when she talks a little bit here. We have a competing system where we want to keep our schools really, really safe and really, really secure. We've probably read lots of articles about metal detectors going in, increased school resource officers going into schools. We recently had the Claire Davis law that was passed that has increased our desire to make sure that kids are socially and emotionally safe. But on the other end, the state likes to also pass laws that say you have to stop with these really, really repressive zero tolerance policies. And there's been plenty of studies about zero tolerance policies, but we're struggling. We're struggling to find a way of how we're going to deal with behavior when it does pop up. So when I talk to schools, this is what they identify, and this is what they tell me, and this is kind of some of the things that we're starting to see a little bit. We're starting to see a sharp increase in use. The interesting thing about marijuana in schools and how behavior is tracked in schools is school administrators have to have reasonable suspicion before they can take action on a student. So if they don't have reasonable suspicion, facts showing them that this student is under the influence of marijuana, it can be very, very, very hard. Administrators are not trained in giving sobriety tests. Administrators are not trained in identifying all of these signs of use. So it's very, very hard to get a student to come out and say, I'm high. I'm high at school. I'm under the influence at school. We have students that are honest and do that, but what we're hearing from our school sites is they're no longer possessing at school. So keep that in mind when I show you some numbers. They're no longer possessing at school. They're doing it before school. They're doing it at lunch. They're doing it at this period. And they're making sure that they don't have it on them. And we also have an increase in related behavior, truancies, an increase in insubordinate behavior, which I'll talk about in a moment, which is just defiance. Schools are battling with the changing delivery systems. Just like had been mentioned earlier, we're seeing cases where students are bringing in brownies for their friends. And the interesting addition to that is that the brownies were prepared by the student and their mom. And the mom happens to work in the industry, so therefore they work together, and the daughter says, oh, what the heck, I'll bring a dozen in, and then a dozen kids are now consuming those at school. So those changing delivery systems are very, very hard. And of course, the struggle with the messaging is probably the biggest one. We operate under this idea of in loco parentis, where we are in place of the parent. And one of my duties is to also serve as the expulsion officer for the district. So I often have meetings with parents, and the idea of in loco parentis gets really, really difficult, because I've noticed over the course of 6 years I can pretty much divide parents into two different categories. One, parents that want their kids to be better off than they were, and two, parents that want to take their kid down the hole with them. If I'm going to have a parent that's going to take the kid down the hole with them, and I can usually tell by their responses, I know exactly how that hearing is going to go. Because nothing in my message or nothing that I say will get across. So our messaging is tough. Kids do a lot of research. They carry phones, they're on iPads all the time, and I'm telling you, the two greatest sites out there, Google and Facebook, are just, they're just so robust with information that the kids just keep telling me all the time. It's like we'd have heard, it's the most natural product that's out there. And I ask them, well, why don't you drink alcohol? Well, because that's not natural. All right, I got you. All right, so this messaging, and we struggle with the messaging now with parents as well. I know Sergeant Cintron's not going to be happy that I'm mentioning the fact that I do pay visits to homes every now and then, and sometimes they get really, really sticky. And it's really hard when you go to a house that has 4 students who are truant, and you realize you can get 4 students back in school by 1 home visit. And when you open the door, and it's like being at a Rolling Stones concert or any rock concert, it's really tough to kind of share that message. So that's kind of what we're struggling with. So I show you some numbers real quick, kind of some trends that we've been talking about. But again, nothing like the studies we've shown before. This would be District 11 and 2010 to 2015-16. I wanted to show this because you take a look at 2010, 2011. We're sitting around 251 marijuana-related drugs. Incidents. District 11 was different in the fact that we had always reported marijuana out separately. So I've been able to track that from 2011 or 2010 to 2015. If someone was to ask me how has the recreational marijuana issue really, really affected schools, I would say, well, I think you have to go back even further, which I have not done. Because there's a tremendous spike that we've seen, and I haven't obviously put them in this type of number from prior to 2010, 2011. And the most interesting thing when you look up here is with January 14, that year was really our lowest year over the last 6. However, the year after was really pretty terrible. We had quite a bit in that year. In fact, 1 month alone, I think we had 30 events across the district. So pretty big, but if you listen to people reporting out on this, and there'll be some sides of the argument that will report out that, oh, the schools aren't really that affected. If you go back 4 years or 5 years, if you looked at our numbers, you'd probably say the same. I would say you need a much more comprehensive picture. And the difficulty with that is a number of school districts across the state used to only report out drugs. So you can't pull all of that out. So District 11 is slightly different in that fact. So this one, it looks like, you guys probably would see this as one of those monitors in the emergency room. The good news about this is that we have more school contact days than ever before. So you should feel good. We're with your kids more often. This just shows pretty much the number of events that we've had per month by contact day. And then here you can see we've gone from about 1.2 events per contact day, contact month, up to about 1.4. So again, when you're looking across those 6 years, it doesn't look like much has really happened. So we went back and I asked my schools about these types of things. What are you seeing the most? And they said, well, grade level, you can almost predict the pattern of marijuana use. It's not going to hit in elementary school, very small numbers. 6th, 7th, 8th grade, it'll start ramping up, and watch out when those kids get to 9th and 10th grade. They hit high school, they hit our high schools, and something just seems to go off the tracks a little bit. Part of that is a newfound responsibility and newfound freedom that we spend hours and hours training them. You have to be responsible when you get to high school, because it's going to be a different story. A big one, when I was in school, there was no doubt that every boy thought, to some degree, they had a little bit of James Dean in them. And boys smoked marijuana. Girls drank Boone's Farm. Boone's Hill? Boone's? I can't remember, but boys smoked marijuana and drank cheap beer. Girls drank cheap wine. We'll just put it that way. We're seeing a pretty interesting trend in the last couple of years, having a lot of female Hispanic students and female Caucasian students getting caught with marijuana at school and incidents at school. It's still a secondary issue. Our alternatives, which I'll show you here in a minute, is kind of interesting. Our alternative schools have a higher percentage of their behavior is what they deal with is marijuana. And for those of you that don't know, we have all of our alternative schools now on one campus. So we've kind of put them all in what used to be Wasson, and we now call it the Rhoda J. Wasson Academic Campus. So we take a look there. And then, of course, we took a look at cohorts. So if you started 7th grade and this year, what happened to you? And you really can't see anything. It's really just kind of, there's no real pattern to it. You know, the only pattern that we can say is that when you look at grades, we know we're going to get more 9th graders than we're going to get 10th graders. We know that this by 11th grade and this by 12th grade, but this is behavior in general. If you're still misbehaving in 11th grade, we got problems. And if you're still misbehaving when you're a senior, then that's a tough deal to handle. But it's still the same, you know, it has this little pattern to it. Officer Cintron can talk a little bit about the arrests real quick if she'd like, or I can go back to it at the end. Go back to it?
Sure.
No? Okay.
Yeah, keep talking.
And again, here's the issue with the male students. The only one that seems to be raw number-wise that's increasing is African American students. Here's female students. These are just, again, raw number trends going up. Traditional high school. We started with 120 events in 2010, 2011. Last year we had 150 at our traditional high schools. Some of you may have kids in these schools, so don't worry. Remember, it's a really, really, really small percentage of kids. Okay? Even though the kids will tell you, oh, come on, Mr. X. And they tell me this all the time. Mr. X, everybody smokes a little weed. Everybody smokes a little weed. AP students smoke a little weed. The athletes, don't even get me started. Right? Post-game parties, the athletes are all over it. So everybody does it. This, of course, are numbers, and of course, all of this is subject to so many different variables, it's hard to even say how significant even this recording would be, but these are just our numbers that we go off with to try to identify some sort of trend or see if we can see anything that's going on. As a percentage of behavior, I know it's all colors and scratch marks, but here one school looks as if it's increasing, and that would be Coronado. However, we know that's not the case because there was a massive miscode in the data, which I found yesterday. So that's good news. So they're dealing with lots more behavior. Here's alternative schools. Once again, the jump in alternative schools is getting a little bit different. They're tending to deal with a higher percentage of their behavior. That's what this shows as a percentage. When they were separate as schools, they were about 2.5%, and now they're up to about 6% of their behavior when they're at Wasson. So 8th grade, got some increase in the 8th grade use as well. We expect that. The good thing to know is that elementary school has yet to see a real big push. So there's some talk that has been pushed down to lower grades. We're still dealing with issues in elementary school, but the issues that we see in elementary school are largely the student who picked up the bag that was sitting on daddy's coffee table and brought it in. And then we're dealing with the parent at that point. A couple of things about alcohol, insubordination, and truancy. Alcohol will always be a default to the safe, as I call it. So students who are not involved in that activity will say, hey, it could be worse, I could be smoking weed. And now that weed is everywhere, I'll go ahead and smoke alcohol. We have not seen a real big jump at all in other drugs. So Maybe the fact that there's some legal aspect to that is causing that issue. Our students are becoming, this graph here shows how our students' incidence of insubordination, which we define in our district as defiant behavior towards an adult, going up. Somebody argued with me the other day that I really shouldn't talk about that because that could be related to a bunch of other things, like what else they see on Facebook. And there's kind of a general movement afoot that authority is not good. And that might be part of that. Again, huge jump in the number of behaviors that are coming from insubordinate students. My staff would tell me that students who are often insubordinate, it's a short amount of time before we pin them for a drug offense at school. I'll skip this. How do we respond? Over the course, there's just tons of stuff up here. Really, how do we respond? We're caught. We've tried everything. What this shows us is we've tried everything. We've tried criminal charges. We've tried expulsions from school. We tried policies that were really zero tolerance, where they came into our office, first time, out they went. They came in our office, we asked them to go get drug tested. They come into our office, we would send them out to do community service. We've tried a lot of different responses to handle student behavior. It's been really, really difficult. So where are we headed? We have an increased collaboration with our school resource team, which Lisa will talk about in just a minute. 14-215 Senate bill was passed recently. This gives us some funds, and we're working with the local 14-215 group to start a program that will allow us some prevention and some intervention so we can get out ahead of this instead of responding to it like we used to in traditional method. But what we really need to do is we really need to start analyzing the costs. Dr. Finn asked me if I could analyze the cost of this. We've had so many people in our schools with counselors and social workers for so long. I would have to go out and actually really survey them and say, how much more time are you spending dealing with families and students that are involved with marijuana? So I'll turn it over to Lisa real quick, and she'll finish up with what she has there.